Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us, and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. Welcome back to another episode of Wild Sacred Journey podcast. So, as always, we just take a couple deep breaths in and out together. Feeling as we do that breath is life force. It animates us, it moves between us, it is shared. Weaves us into the fabric of life. So as we acknowledge that fabric of life, we acknowledge the land we're each on, plants, the animals, the mycorrhizal fungi, the elementals, the weather patterns, celestial bodies, reptiles, insects, all of creation, rocks, crystals, people, technology, cars, machinery. It's part of our council now, whether we like it or not. It's part of that fabric, part of that cloth. And so as we take these breaths together, as we weave ourselves into where we each are and where we are together, we light the candle, our bonfire. Gathering round. And so I am here in the warm sun, cool air, warm sun of Arizona for this episode. And I'm thrilled to have my dear friend Anna on today. And she's one of those people who I've always felt like she's just made up of like gentleness and iron, like this beautiful combination of this softness and just this like clarity and steel and iron and strength, like just so beautifully woven together. And I feel like she's just has such clear vision and passion for a better world. And so it's been my honor to get to witness the last few years of her journey and like an ongoing courageous blossoming. Before we started recording, we were even talking about tender shoots. And so it feels like, yeah, this blossoming and so I'm thrilled to have her. She is a birth and postpartum doula, educator, and coach. She's devoted to providing care and support for thriving through transformative life events, promoting an orientation toward process, growth, autonomy, and interdependence. Her first career was in experimental dance and performance in New York City for 13 years. And she is mother to two forces of nature, her most powerful and disruptive teachers, Ellery, who's 6, and Eartha, who's 2.5. And so welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, Kate. So sweet.
Yeah. So I'm not a mother myself and have never been sure that's really like, I've always sort of felt ambivalent that was sort of what I was meant to contribute to the world. And the older I get, the more I feel like that's probably true. Although, life sometimes takes us in unexpected directions. But I want, birth is such a profound, I've witnessed so many of my friends go through that process, and I have so many birth workers in my sphere now. And,
Yeah.
and I'm always, so anyway, it's such a powerful topic. And I know it's so important for so many people. And so, yeah, I'm thrilled to have you on to sort of talk more
Yeah.
about things that are not my experience.
Right. Totally. And gosh, I
Um,
mean, like, you say I didn't want to interrupt you, but you say that you're not a mother. And it's so interesting because, like, there's like mother as someone who has like, um, well, it's, you can choose to call yourself whatever, you can
mhm.
choose, of course, to say that you're not a mother. And I do know that you mother in some ways, if you are, if you identify with that,
Mhm, mhm.
because we mother in so many more ways
Yeah,
um than bringing
sure.
children into the world, bringing, offspring into the world,
Yeah.
or caring for offspring that other people bring into the world.
Yeah. And I love that. Yes. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Because it's true. And we have these different cycles in our lives. Like, I know we've worked together on sort of I had this mini offering I was doing at one point, sort of these four feminine archetypes had come through, and I was really working some within myself, and then sort of shared that with some other people. And I know you were someone, who took
Yeah,
advantage of that.
I loved it.
And yeah, and it is, we have like these different life seasons, whether we actually birth children into the world or not. That mother archetype is still a powerful feminine archetype to work with, and also to be conscious of how she is in our lives, because there are times when we're not even aware that we're mothering, and that may not be the right energy actually that we want to be bringing to what we're doing. We may actually want to be bringing a different archetypal energy, or a different feeling tone to that sort
Mm,
of giving and nourishing and nurturing may not always be the appropriate. There are ways to connect with people that isn't through nourishing them, right?
yes.
And we don't always yeah, especially I think the way women are socialized, or people in more estrogen dominant bodies are socialized in our society. There's a lot of encouraging positive reinforcement for nourishing and nurturing others as the way of connecting, and as
Hmm.
as the
Hmm.
way of, yeah, moving through the world, getting what we want, whatever it might
Mm,
be.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I had the thought that when we create something, we mother it
Mhm.
as it. So you've created your business, you've created your body of work, and you are nurturing it, and considering what to protect and what to let go, what to release, and
Mm.
when releasing it is appropriate, and when protecting is necessary.
Yeah.
And so we mother the things we create and bring into the world for
Yeah.
whatever period of time. Um, you know,
Mm.
different different for each creation, I think.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes too, we realize, like, I had the realization too when I started doing this archetype work, that, you know, many people listening to this, some people listening to this probably know that I had bought an old RV, a really old RV, a 36-year-old RV. And I was gonna fix it up and do this whole full-time nomad thing. And I, spent 2 years working on it with help here and there, sometimes alone, sometimes with help. And it was a really challenging process. And then the pandemic happened, and it kind of forced me to sort of put pause to the idea of wandering, and as I did, and as I kind of sat with it, I started realizing, like, oh, I'm really burnt out because I'm mothering this business. And then I also am mothering this RV, because this RV is always going to need a lot of, or maybe geriatric care would be the better, but my relationship with it was like always going to be like mothering slash hospice nursing,
Yes.
And I was like, wow, like, I'm looking around my life, and I'm going, like, where in my life do I have things that are actually feeding back into me, so that I can keep pouring out into the things I do need to mother and tend to. And I was like, there is a serious imbalance going on here. And
Oh,
that, like, helped me get really clear on, like, okay, not this RV or not at this time, or, I don't have the capacity to like actually give that level of givingness to all the things in my life that I've set up my life with all these things that need that level of me giving to them. And I need to, recognize my capacity and make some changes about like what, like set my life up a little differently so that I have the things I can give to the things that are really priorities. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And in that thinking, you were like also mothering the dream or the vision that you'd had.
Mm,
And you were mothering ultimately, like you came back to mothering yourself,
yeah.
to being like, oh, I see what like this inside of me. And that is also, I'm sure, also was like, what was the seed of the vision? And you found the seed of the vision inside of yourself. And then, kind of like did a, maybe this is what it sounds like, did like a 360 or a 180 to like bring the energy back inside. Um, yeah, to be able to like nurture the start of that vision again, to find out what it yeah, what it was about for you.
Mm,
A little bit of this
yeah.
I'm guessing, and a little bit of this I like heard explicitly, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it is. And I mean, I feel like this comes up in sessions with clients frequently, is sort of that, like, we can get so attached to what we think the outcome's going to look like. We have this want and we get attached to what we think the outcome's going to look like. And sometimes then we have to realize, like, oh, wait, no, let me come back to what the actual want is, because that's actually what the outcome I was aiming for is not actually taking me towards what I actually wanted. And so we have to, yeah, part of that manifestation is it's not focused on the end goal that we're aiming for. It's actually about staying true to the want. And then, and so if the want is more freedom, like freedom was not happening
Right.
in that situation. And so it was like, so let's come back to the want and then say, I don't know what freedom's going to look like or feel like. I've never been there before in quite this way, but I'm going to keep following the thread that feels like freedom and trust where it takes me, which is way
Mm,
more challenging for my ego to be
mm.
okay with the part of
Oh,
me that wants to control. But ultimately, it's actually more freeing. Like,
right.
funnily enough, like that's actually like following the thread of freedom is actually freedom.
Totally. And right, we think of freedom in this like we think of so many things in this like surface way, because we don't want to admit that like it's that there's fear in like in the center of so many of the things that we think we want. There's like
Mhm.
unpleasantness. It could be, I guess fear is one thing that can be, but there's unpleasant like feelings and experiences around the seeds of the things that we like know that we desire or
Mm,
need. I mean, freedom is a need too,
mhm,
I think. Do you
mm.
think?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah, or
like,
at least I think it certainly is in the culture that we're living in now. I don't know that
mm,
I'm not sure. Perhaps it has always been a human need. I don't know. Um, but certainly it feels like one in the days we find ourselves in.
yeah.
um,
I think it's related to like autonomy and the freedom. So even like freedom of thought. So for sure, so there's like expression of freedom, like moving, being able to move freely. Um, but I think a like core human fear that's like pretty, I think that's universal, is like being confined.
mhm.
Um, yeah, so it feels like that. It feels to me like freedom is actually a need at yeah, something that is needed and wanted.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's, I mean, I think I mean, and I think where this conversation gets really nuanced and complex is like everybody means something different when they say the word freedom, like slightly
Of
different,
course.
you know? And so that's where then, yeah, so that's where, I, because as you're speaking and as I'm kind of feeling into this question, I'm sitting with like, well, if is what is freedom, and for me, freedom feels like flow, perhaps
Mm,
might be a good, like, it feels like expression.
mhm.
Um, it feels like sort of that wildness, that spark, that life force,
Yeah.
whether that's sensuality and eros or whether, whatever that is and however
Yeah.
that manifests and however we individually feel called to express that in the world. Um, but we can't like all of those things feel safer with some level of containment,
Yeah.
right? And so like our nervous systems, like, we used to like back when we were more like prime, like we feel safer in caves, right? Like as long as there's no wild animal in the cave that's going to eat us, we go into the cave and suddenly we don't have to watch our backs in the same way. We don't have to be as widely aware, right? And we can actually relax, right? So there's that. So and I feel like for some people that might feel like confinement because we're
Right.
also kind of used to this oversharing and kind of this overexpression and sort of this like actual lack of boundaries. And so while yes, I think freedom's a need, I also think healthy containment is a need.
Yes, me too.
And yeah, oh my goodness. I don't know if those, can you hear those, or is my
No.
microphone picking up? There's either a pack of dogs or a pack of coyotes walking past
Oh,
right now. There's some massive howling happening.
they heard you
Speaking of
talking about the
freedom and
cave.
wildness and
Yeah.
caves, yeah.
That's awesome.
Uh, that's
Yeah,
amazing. Oh my
it's like
goodness.
freedom is like having, or like the need is like the spark that you talk about being like allowed to be there. So it's like the
Mm,
difference between it being like extinguished
yes.
and
Yeah.
being like allowed to be. It's like this, even if it's just a little spark or a small flame, like it has its own life and its own
Yeah.
animation
Yeah.
and its own wildness.
Yeah.
And then
And how do
you
we
could
nurture
cover
that
it
and
up.
tend that? Yeah.
Yeah, and you could like deprive it of oxygen and then it goes out. Or you could expose it to too much and it gets, it also goes out because it's too exposed. So it's like
Yeah.
that feels like I don't know, I've of course never thought about it like this. This is collaboration of metaphor, but
Uh-huh.
like
Uh-huh.
that like yeah, it's so freedom could be bigger than that, but there's that combination, that like dual force of like freedom and safety at
Mhm.
like all different uh sizes times
Mm, mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
capacity.
Yeah. Beautiful. So I love this thread we've kind of gone down. We just jumped right into conversation. And I still want to also like give you an opportunity to sort of introduce yourself socially. And so this sort of ties in a little bit in some ways because I think part of that freedom containment is also like individuality and collectiveness. And certainly that ties in with birth, to go from an individual to like a we in your own body, and then also
Yeah.
in the wider world. So anyway, but yeah, so what social markers or how do you like beyond your sort of professional bio? Yeah, what are the identities or roles or locations or ancestry or lineages
Mm,
that kind of weave you into the fabric for people?
yeah, thank you. Such a nice opportunity to even think about
Yeah.
that. So really at the kind of forefront of my mind always is that I have two young kids. So I'm a mother, as you said, to two little young people. And before that, I was working in the like birth and postpartum space. So before I had kids, I was like curious about and engaged in supporting this time, this transformative time, though I for sure not couldn't conceive of the depth of the transformative time for my, in the way, I wish that I think back to how I was supporting people before I had my own kids. And I wonder how, if they felt that I didn't have the depth of appreciation for what had happened. I think specifically, when you're in a birth space, it's pretty hard you can't really not understand and and the process, the kind of intensity and the seismic nature of what's happening. It's like whatever senses you're in touch with, you're gonna absorb the enormousness of birth. But postpartum is so quiet, and it's so the transformation that's happening in that time, I couldn't understand before. I think there are people who do, but I couldn't understand it before I went through it. Yeah. So let's see. I think but I can go back to, so before you, as you said, so before I was in the birth and postpartum world, before I was a parent, I was a dancer. So I had this early life experience of being so from very young age, 6 or something, I was engaged in creative process and in being in experimenting space with other bodies. So I think bodies have always been interesting to me. And that's for sure what got me interested in birth. And I'm realizing right now that part of what probably got me into birth was a subconscious pull toward learning about what parenting, maybe specifically mothering, is about, because I have generations of, so my mother's mother died before I was born, when my mom was young. She was 10. And her mother's mother died before my mom was born. And it's all held in like, nobody knows very much about, I don't know very much about my ancestors, but about my maternal line, my matrilineage. And so I think, I bet that there was some kind of like subconscious pull toward that in getting me interested in birth and postpartum and that transition before, even before like I was ready to do that myself. And that has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger, like really much, kind of exponentially stronger, that desire to understand. And then more recently, just a trust that I do understand, even if I don't know the stories. And that, that happens sometimes in like eerie ways where I'm like having images that I'm like, oh, that's not mine. I'm carrying something that is deeper or longer or older than my own experience. Which I don't think I knew to believe in before I kind of like tripped along, like found myself in the muck of the challenges around parenting and postpartum transition for myself.
Yeah, so many, beautiful threads in that. I guess, so I've been on a deep dive myself, sort of exploring ancestry and how we can start to access, even when we don't know the stories, like how we can start to access, because it's our head that doesn't know the stories, but our bones, our bodies, our fascia, our, and our connective tissue, our muscles, our energy, our hearts, our souls, like they know the stories. They actually do. And like these different
Yeah.
ways that we access them. And so I'd love if you're willing, that moment where you're like, this isn't mine. And I'm sure we've all kind of had that moment. And yet at the same time, I feel like sometimes it's easy to doubt those moments or to kind of miss them because they're so subtle and we just are sort of taught to doubt them. And, I think that question comes up for a lot of people sometimes, like, how do I know what's mine? And how do I know what may be in my body, but didn't originate with me, or
Mm,
maybe someone else's from my environment or like society's, but isn't actually mine. And so what is that like? I'm curious in feeling, and maybe you take a moment to feel into your body. I don't know, but like, yeah, can you sort of pinpoint like what is the sort of quality of it that like lets you know that it's not yours? Like, what does
mm,
that feel like or look
mm.
like or sense like, seem like or sound like or smell like or whatever for you
Yeah.
in that moment?
Well, yeah. Well, one time that is that stands out, um, I think it probably feels like so many of the things that we just kind of like go through our days with and expect. Like, I mean, you speak to this around dissatisfaction, this feeling of like, like I do not like this thing that is true about my life. And that, like, that rubbing, that like
Mm-hmm.
raw grating feeling,
Mm-hmm.
um, that I think that that is possibly our something coming up to talk, like something wanting to talk to us about maybe, how far back could it be? It could be really far back, or it could just be like a childhood thing, like rubbing up against circle or just trying to get our attention. I mean, you say this when you talk about dissatisfaction, which I just like have loved so much.
Mm.
Um, well, one time, when was this? 8 months ago, something. I was I had been to a body worker, and she said at the end of our session, like, this is going to be a big day or week for you. So I think I was primed. I had that in my mind, and I'm with both my kids, probably alone for a long day, and I'm nursing my younger kid, and I was just feeling so, I hoped that the body worker meant like, this is going to be a big day for you. Like things are going to come together in the way that you
Yeah.
want them, you know? Um,
Lottery, not
right,
like Dark Night of the Soul. Yeah.
right. Oops. I really, who knows what she was conscious of, who knows what she thought, but
Uh-huh.
that's for sure what I was hoping for. But I'm nursing my young kid and just feeling so low, and just like
Mhm.
low, 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 low. And I think I like laid back, and I had this image of like sinking, and she was in my arms, and I'm like I just could feel like I was going deeper and deeper and deeper into water.
Mm.
And that was when I was like, I did have this really conscious thought that this is not my grief, that this is my mother's grief and her mother's grief. And it could be older than that, but it's not accessible to me as a story, only as like a sensation.
Mhm. Mm. Mm. Mm.
And then, I find, if I'm conscious of my thoughts and my stories, I find also that there's connection to, um, my ancestors there too. Um, and also my family, um, not even my ancestry very far behind me, really, my living parents and their living parents. And, I have Yeah, when I'm aware, when I'm conscious of the stories I'm running, I often find some connection there
Mm,
to
mhm,
either a known thing or not known.
mhm.
Um, and people talk about how the trajectories of our lives too are in direct relationship to our how the people who came before us thought of themselves and thought what they could imagine for their futures. um, and that's a really interesting thing to um, I
Yeah.
think that our society kind of accepts that, kind of like it is like, oh well, right, you do go along the same trajectory. And yeah, so I think that's kind of a hard thing to break open and be willing to open it up. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's, in the studies around epigenetics, which is like the study of how our environment actually affects our genetic expression rather than simply like biology, rather than simply genetics, and sort of that more Mendelian um, sort of like if A and then B and, like um, minor genes and whatever. Anyway, but yeah. And so, one of the premises for that is, that when specifically, you're speaking about matrilineal lines and that in each, when when there's a female fetus, she already has all the eggs that she'll have in her life as a fetus. So that means that when a woman is pregnant with the fetus, that fetus already has all the potential children that she might have in sort of the form that they're in that moment as an egg,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
unfertilized, but still. And so, and because of like just how we're mostly like water and fluid and all of that. And, when we think about energy and we think about vibration and sound, and so whether it's stories and myths, right? And humans are storytelling creatures, whether it's through song, whether it's through dance, whether it's through myth, whether it's through movie, whether it's through book, whatever it is, we are storytelling creatures. We're meant to gather. We're meant to share stories. We're meant to learn from stories. That's how we learned about our environment. That's how we learned about each other. That's how we pass down what we thought it was okay to expect and what we thought it was okay to believe in. And that's partly where I think some of that trajectory sense that you were talking about kind of comes from. And so all of that is sound,
Right.
right? It's all expressed, it's all sound waves, And so if you think about sort of this fetus in the fluid, right? Like
Yeah.
fluid is one of the greatest conductors of sound waves,
Right.
actually.
Right.
And so, like, of course, like, and so all of that's imprinting on this fetus and the fetus's eggs. And
Right.
so, when you think about like how many generations are actually like present, and then the woman who's carrying the child, who's carrying, the fetus, who's carrying the eggs, right? Like that woman was at one point an egg in a
Right.
fetus. And, so there's just, it's so deeply intertwined, like
Yeah.
it really collapses timelines in a lot of
Yeah.
ways when you start, and you can really start to realize like, man, like, of course I'm going to be affected by what happened to my ancestors, to the
Right.
people who came before me.
Yeah.
And of course, it's going to be in my body in a really deep and visceral way. And so I loved what you said, that piece you said about one of the ways. Yes, sometimes it comes through in stories that you're like, oh, wow, I can hear my mother's voice saying that same thing. Or like, oh, that sounds really similar to that thing my father said all the time, like
Yeah.
coming out of my mouth. But also that piece you said about, sometimes, it's maybe not yours because you don't have access to the story of it. You actually just have access to the felt sensation of it or the felt emotion of it, combined maybe with an image or a sense that, and sometimes it's ancestral and sometimes it's past life, if you want to believe in that. And sometimes it's archetypal. And
Mm,
we don't always need to know the difference between those, has been my experience.
mm.
It's more because at this point it's in our bodies and we get to decide what we're going to do with what's in our bodies and how we're going to like tend that or nourish that or nurture that or repair any ruptures or, because we can't go back and change what happened to people in the past. And no amount of knowing or being more specific and identifying what it was and how it happened is actually going to make a difference. But it's in our bodies now. That grief that you were experiencing was there now. That sinking sensation into the water was there in that moment, now. And so then you get to choose like, okay, how do I hold this? How do I want to move forward
Yeah.
with this, from this, whatever.
Yeah. And we're so not taught that we get to decide what we, not always taught that we get to investigate that and choose, and that we have the power to, that we have um the authority to choose what to do with that, to feel we've been talking about like feeling what we want, feeling what it is, what's true to us. And there's so much noise that it can be so hard to, kind of like pare down to
Mhm.
what that, to, shed the layers of conditioning, or just of like a life's worth of thinking, to like
Mhm.
really feel into
Mhm.
what can be communicated to us about our authentic desires,
Yeah.
as, direction for to what to choose for yourself, or yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Well, it seems like we're really good at trying to pathologize things. Like if I can name it, then it's codified, which I think sort of probably dates back to some of like enlightenment or like Greek deductive reasoning, kind of like, we've had hundreds of years, at least we of European descent have had hundreds of years of sort of, yeah, being taught this is how we think about the world. And so it's like, yeah, we go through and we try to sort of name something, whether it's, you know, um, you know, grief, maybe in your case, which then could easily get labeled as like postpartum depression, which is a valid thing. So I'm not
Yes.
like knocking that. And again, there's then the question of, but, oftentimes I think we tend to have a we have a tendency to take a diagnosis and then make an identity out of it, sort of pathologize it and codify it and make an identity out of it and sort of like write it in stone, like on our gravestone, that like, this was my experience, and we sort of start to feel like our stories, yeah, they're almost like these stone tablets that we're engraving everything that happened to us into, and we forget that like stories morph, and like not what happened, like what happened to us doesn't change, but the story we tell about what happened to us can change and
Mm.
grow. And like, our bodies, our cells like cycle through every 7 years and are like completely renewed. And so
Mm.
like nothing is actually as fixed and as firm and as hard as I think we like to think it is. And
Mm.
so, I think it can happen too in some of these. I see it a lot in sort of some ancestral spaces. It's like we either want to get back to a time that was pure, or we want to be able to name exactly what happened to everybody and everything so that we can know who we are and where we came from. And there's a lot of validity to that. And in my experience, it's also like, but what about the fluidity of like, oh, that grief just arose and like, wow, that wasn't mine. But I acknowledge it and I honor it, and there it went.
Mm.
And maybe it'll come back again and maybe not. Maybe that's all it needed was someone to acknowledge it. Cause like we were talking about with that flame earlier, like usually the ancestral stuff is stuck in our bodies because they weren't free. Whoever it was who originally felt it wasn't free to express it, wasn't free to experience it. And so it got tamped down. And
Mm.
so then it gets passed down, passed down, passed down until someone's willing to witness it. Someone's willing to experience it. Someone's willing to be like, grief, there you are. Welcome, friends. Let's sit down for tea. No, you're ready to leave already? Okay, thanks. Bye. you know? or sometimes it sits for a while and we have to like be with it for a little while. But yeah, we don't have to keep carrying it in our bodies. We have the power to change the stories, and I think that's this is that thread that you were sort of starting with. Like, we're taught to believe we can expect certain things from life, just because this is how it was always done, or just because this is how our parents experienced it, or just because, however. And I think I've mentioned this perhaps on another episode, but it's like evolutionarily, like I couldn't understand for a while. I was like, why is that evolutionarily true? Like, that doesn't seem
Mm,
helpful, right?
mm,
But then it was like, again, in studying epigenetics, they were talking about part of the reason our genes start to express themselves differently based on longstanding environmental shifts is so that, because if we've had to adapt to a certain situation, experience, trauma, ongoing traumatic situation, they were looking at Holocaust survivors, right? And noticing that a lot of the shifts that occurred in their body because of starvation, because of all of the other things they experienced, right?
mm.
The adaptations their body made around those traumatic experiences actually genetically got passed down to their ancestors, and then even to their descendants of their descendants.
Mhm.
And again, it's like that was an ongoing traumatic event. The body adapted because, and then epigenetically, that it makes sense actually evolutionarily to pass that down, because you're assuming then that that's how the world now looks. And so a survivor is, going to, they've adapted positively, in
Right.
theory,
They're
like from an
prepared.
evolutionary standpoint. Right,
They're
exactly.
prepared to live in the conditions that their parents and grandparents um,
Exactly. Yeah.
adapted to. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but then we have to start to ask, okay, but wait, those aren't actually ongoing conditions right now. So is that actually a helpful adaptation? And if not, how can I start to shift that for myself and then my offspring, so that I don't keep passing down these adaptations that made sense within a specific context, and actually, and we're evolutionarily wise in a certain context, and then are evolutionarily less wise in different contexts.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm curious. I mean, I feel like we're sort of weaving a little bit back to sort of like birth and like offspring, but sort of, yeah, I know for you, one of your passions is like that thriving families create thriving individuals and thriving worlds, and that it really does start with the family. And so, like, how are the ways, I'm curious, what are you seeing as the ways that we've maybe like pathologized the experience of birth in ways that like
Mm.
aren't helpful, or made sense in a certain context and then maybe don't make as much sense in the context we're in now? Or what do you feel like people have come to expect as the birth experience? What are the things they've come to expect as normal that you feel like maybe actually aren't setting up thriving families? Or
Mm.
what does that look like in your experience?
Yeah. The thing that first comes into my mind is the thought that there's this casualness that I think comes with um, the relative safety of delivering in like modern society with lots of medical technology, lots of ways of measuring, uh, being able to diagnose prenatally things that wouldn't have been diagnosable, I don't know, decades ago. But there's this relative safety that can be, and this degree of control that I think leads to a casual approach, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, to
Mhm.
a transition, to a life transition. So there's kind of the sense um, of like, I'm going to add something into my life. I'm going to add, I'm going to go
Mhm.
through uh, a, very common um, um, physiological process. And then on the other side, I'm going to have something that I'm going to add to my life, a role that I'm going to add to my life. And so there's this, I want to find another way of saying it, but like just this way of approaching it with an assumption, with some fear. Everyone has fear. That's like so normal. But the fears that we're really like willing to look at are, for the most part, um, are like fears like, is it going to be like, am I going to deliver my baby in my car? Or,
Mm.
something that is like, so, and also to acknowledge like, this is for sure different for Black and brown families who like, there is a way of preparing that is different. I know that with maternal morbidity being
Yeah.
so different
Yeah.
among populations, uh, there is like a spiritual preparation, I think, that is probably inclusive of um, grief and anger when people
Mm.
are preparing in let's see, when people of color are preparing, I think there
Yeah.
could be uh, um, uh, being in touch with a different set of like existential danger.
It's not as safe. Yeah.
It's not as safe, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and it is very, because it's like highly medically controlled, there is a way that people move forward into it and through it with a sense of control and a sense of fear about factors that are I think this word is like I want to say trivial, and it's not. That I know that like it's like the details are not at all trivial. They're
Yeah.
so meaningful.
Maybe surface level,
Something like that.
more,
Yeah.
a little more on the kind of more the mundane details of it. And so you
Yeah.
kind of just think that that's all you have to tend to, right? Is that sort of what I'm hearing you
That
saying?
is what I'm like thinking, and
Yeah.
then like I'm also having this sense of like like that's not right. Like, if of
Mm,
course the details matter so much, like to the to
sure.
the to the minutia, because it matters how like the how one person in your birth experience speaks to you
Mm,
matters. You know
mm,
what I mean? Like, it all matters.
hmm.
And there is a way that we really are yeah, we're living with this sense of like, most likely everybody's coming to the other side um, alive and intact,
Hmm.
and with like traumas or scars or things that are that we're able to tend to, that we have
Hmm.
the tools to
Like
and resources to
medically.
tend to medically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm sort of hearing too, maybe, and maybe the word is sort of almost more clinically, like we focus more on like the clinical details, because
Mhm.
yes, the details matter, like you were saying, and like how one person speaks to you makes a difference. But like, those aren't the details people are, even that is not totally the details people are planning for. It seems
Mhm.
like for the most, I
Mhm.
mean, in general, like that's a
Mhm.
broad generalization, but
Mhm.
or people might tend to them and kind of, like you tend to it with like who you sort of want in the birth room with you, or like who, maybe setting some boundaries around like how quickly your parents can come visit you, after you've
Mhm.
given birth. I know some people who've that's kind of been part of their journey,
Yeah.
but yeah, it seems like we're mostly guided in cases where people are really going hospital birth and really like leaning into sort of the Western medicine tradition and
Mhm.
mode. Yeah, it can get
Mhm.
very like, these are the decisions you have to make, but they're very sort of clinical
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
and maybe don't
Um,
factor in sort of the deep like spiritual, mental, emotional transformation piece that is also
yeah.
present.
And so when we don't look at that, so there are small deaths that happen within that identity shift that I think get glossed over, just like we don't generally talk about mortality as we like plan for birth. Like I think we can kind of like look away from that. We have the
Mm,
luxury of looking away from that most of the time, I think. Um, and there are these like, and we also then are looking through some away from some other discomforts, which is like how our identity pieces of our identity die, and in order for something new and something that is going to be liminal, something that is going to be, there's going to be this for initial birth that is like mucky and messy and not, and doesn't feel good and solid and confident. And we can look away from that too, and we can pathologize that too, this kind of like um um this version of ourselves that is incomplete, not fully formed. It's not incomplete, I don't think, but it's not fully formed into
mhm,
something that
mhm.
we that
What,
feels like we can be out in the world as, that
mm.
we don't feel that we.
Yeah, it seems like we kind of project some of that then onto the body, right? Like getting the body back, quote unquote. Yeah. And it's like underneath that sort of impulse is like this whole like, oh, everything's out of my control right now. Or like, I don't know, like maybe that discomfort of some of that liminal space. I don't know. That's occurring to me as
Yeah,
you're sort of speaking.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because I know, it's been interesting. I've had a lot of different friends who've chosen a lot of different experiences, and I'm certainly not here to like, I believe everybody should get to make the choice that feels right for them. So I'm not here to say that anybody's choice was like better than anybody else's. But it's been very interesting because I have some friends who've really stepped into this space of like, this is going to be this huge initiation and transformation. And I'm going to really set myself up for that. Like much like I think how you kind of that your perspective and a lot of what you really espouse
Mhm.
and feel passionate about. And then I have friends who have kind of stepped into this, like, I want the C-section. I want it kind of as control. Like I want to sort of know what day it's going to happen. And I want to just kind of, yeah, like minimal interruption and sort of maximum kind of efficiency and or comfort. And, and, and I'm curious, and again, not from a place of like one being better than the other, but I'm just curious if what you see as, I feel like you, from knowing you and knowing your perspective, it sort of feels like per or knowing what I know of your perspective, I should
Mhm.
say.
Oh,
I'm not making claims to know your perspective.
fair enough.
I feel like, yeah, like I guess what might be, is there a missed opportunity, or is there like what effect does that have on, do those different decisions maybe have, like how do those ripple through,
Mm.
and yeah, and I mean that might not even, I don't know, that feels like a very messy question as I'm asking
Mm.
it, because it already feels like it maybe has some judgment in it. Like I have some ideas around it.
Right.
Um and
Yeah.
so I just want to name that and like,
Yeah,
yeah.
totally. I mean, I think that I think one way, well, so one immediate thought I have is that sometimes when people can be trying to control it, and it can look in all different ways. So like,
Yeah.
um, I think, and the people who are planning a highly, what we might call like a highly controlled experience, are taking care of themselves in
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
way. I think there's like like how conscious are you of the ways that you're trying to tend to um tend to your fears, your, kind of like your needs and your fears. um what are the ways that you're choosing to tend to
Mm,
those? Because you could be like,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a transformative experience. I know, you could do just as much of the kind of planning to
Yeah.
be in something that looks to you
Mhm.
that looks to someone like a um
Quote unquote spiritually evolved.
sure, or
Yeah,
like, yeah, I mean,
birth or
maybe I can't
yeah,
find the
yeah.
word because it's like, what is it exactly? But
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that lays that
Yeah.
you think you're laying the foundation for, like, I mean, and I did this for my second. For my first, I don't know what the version of it was. You know, but I'll say for my second, I did have this sense of like, okay, I know some more, I have some more tools, I have some more of a sense of like how important this transition is. I've been through a postpartum time, but then also like the wildness of having a toddler, which was way more messy or emotionally for me than my first postpartum time was, like the
Mm.
like having an actual like willful child. Um, so we going back to something so did feel like I'd laid the foundation for like a good postpartum experience, and it felt awful.
Mm.
And I believe that it was in that, so then I had some judgment about why it felt awful, and like, oh, what were the details that I didn't, what did I do wrong? What were the details um that I didn't pay attention
Mm.
to? And that's not the truth of it. Like, the truth of it was that I went more fully into, I don't know that I did it I don't know that I did it willingly. I feel like I was kind of due to circumstance and um kind of brought through, like taken through the ringer a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, but it wasn't because um, let's see, the, like, I think I had to let go more. Um, and I want to tie that back into kind of the question, which was, how does it make a difference? I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know that I don't know. Let's see.
Maybe there is no right experience.
There's definitely not a right experience. And there's definitely,
Yeah.
from the outside, um, very, I don't know. I don't know what the signposts are for like whether you're like actually um, giving over to it or resisting it, or transforming or not transforming, or, you know, um, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and then my mind is also offering me up all kinds of measures for that. And I wonder how much it matters for the sake of this conversation, you know.
Mm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, one of the things I feel like I really, well, I can't say I began learning. We'll say that in my yoga practice, ongoing learning.
yeah,
The yoga practice, I mean, part of the idea is stepping to the mat with the beginner's mind. Like each time we come on it, no matter how many times you've practiced. And there is no perfect practice. There's the practice that you have and the practice that you're open to. And I didn't start doing yoga because I expected it to bring me to where I am today. I started doing yoga because of where I was the day I started doing yoga, and whether I intended to or not, it ended up becoming a profoundly transformative experience. And I was, and yes, how open I was to that made a big difference. But even in the moments where I was resistant to the transformative nature of it, it's that in and of itself, there's that friction again, that rubbing, that
yeah,
sort of dissatisfaction or whatever that sort of sparks something that still is actually transformative.
yeah,
And um
yeah. Right. We don't
mm,
we don't choose the things that, is this true? I mean, we don't choose the ways that something changes us. We don't
yeah.
choose exactly like we may choose to love, and or and then we choose being open to grief. We may choose to have children and then be open to the many variations. We may choose to have birth and then be open to those, but just being alive, continuing to be alive means being open to um things that we haven't chosen that change us.
Mm,
um of
yeah.
course.
It's interesting. This sort of feels like a thread back to sort of some of what you were saying about, about the relative safety that we sort of assume right
Hmm.
now around
Hmm.
birth. And, I've been listening to some conversations on sort of rewilding myths. And, and Sophie Strand, and I've referenced Sophie's name before in this podcast, but Sophie, talks a lot about we have to sort of complicate notions of safety. Um,
Mm.
because who are we to say that the things that feel uncomfortable or unsafe, or even on some level sort of indigestible or unsurvivable, like who are we to say that those things aren't the things that actually grow us and change us? Like those are usually the impulses for evolution, right? Those
Mm.
are the impulses for adaptation. It's when something tries to eat something that isn't outright poisonous, but maybe, isn't outright fatal, I should say, but is relatively indigestible to it, that its body starts to change and adapt. Right. And so who are we to say that safe and sanitary is the best way to
Yeah.
continue evolution? And in fact, we're sort of seeing now with like increased sterilization and then also sort of increased allergies that like maybe it's actually not, or maybe the increased allergies are from just different pollutants in the air. And because the rate of change of those things is so much faster than the rate of how our bodies adapt and evolve. But who's to say that those things that bother us right now, that feel like irritants to us right now, aren't things like they may not to our descendants a few generations from now, because we will have adapted and built up. I mean, here's that epigenetic conversation again, but yeah, but sort of that idea of like, we actually become more resilient and more open to change when we sort of complicate the idea that safety is the primary goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or even that we know the ways we should be transforming, or that we somehow know what the future is going to look like, and we can prepare ourselves for that now. Like
Yeah.
we don't.
Yeah.
Existential crisis is all
No,
out of our
totally.
hands.
And what's so interesting, I think, like we've talked about, um, so I feel like we've talked about two things that are like, um, almost, they feel almost oppositional, like this sense of like, we, when we control, we think we know, or when when we desire to control, we can be wrong about what's actually going to result from that. And then also we were talking about like having, so we were talking a little bit about like wanting and having like this spark of like authenticity, which so when you want and when you design, uh you are having this sense of like a desired outcome, like moving in the direction of a desired outcome. So it's a little bit about your like trailer story, and a little bit about like this. So it's like there's some holding tension between like we don't go fully into like abandoning all
Mhm.
all
Mhm.
design, all
Mhm.
vision, because it's pure chaos and we have no control. And um if we can, there's holding tension between like um having a vision the that is has to be strong too, often to like keep us moving through obstacles or I haven't thought about this for a long time, but I used to yeah, has been one of the things about parenting is like you to get out the door for me with my, with my kids. I hope that your listeners are like, huh? It's not like that. I hope that no one else relates, except that I think many people do.
Uh-huh.
To get out the door, it's like I have to have like such a strong vision of like we're getting out the door by this time, or like maybe not even
Uh-huh.
by this time, but just like I have to hold such like I can't lose it, or we just won't.
Yeah.
And I have to be willing to be like, oh, that happened, okay. Or
Right.
the variables are so like you have to like release control and maintain such focus.
Mm.
um and I think that is true. I think in birth there's like a lot of surrender, a lot of surrender most of the time. And then there is you know there is a moving forward through the process that some vision and some focus can help, although
Yeah.
mostly it's surrender through a lot of that. And then yeah, yeah, I don't know, that's what I wanted to say,
Yeah.
like holding that tension between um something that, so sometimes vision can feel like control, and it's different, and it's has a different energy, but it can feel kind of like the question can come up like, should I just let go of this? Should I let
Mm.
go of, and that's a questions are good. Questions are helpful,
Yeah.
I should say.
Yeah. Well, I love the piece that the difference between surrender, and you even kind of made a gesture. So for anybody watching, you can see that. For people listening, she kind of like opened her hands and sort of her chest kind of opened a little. And so there was like a broadening in the surrender. Um, and then the focus, which was like, hand up kind of in front of the face, and so sort of like gaze locked in. So kind of that like laser focus, you know, but also this like broadening at the same time. And that's something I feel like I work with clients a lot, like being able to, split our awareness, not in ways that divide us, because we have a lot of different things that pull our attention and our awareness in a lot of different ways. So there's still value to like training ourselves to focus in, right? To focus our awareness.
Mhm.
But there's that, but splitting our awareness between like what's happening around me right now, or what's like, and like where are we still aiming? you know
Mhm.
and like, and so yeah, so I think you can really feel, I'm really feeling the difference in sort of that difference between focus versus control.
Mhm.
Because focus feels more like that impulse is coming up from inside you, and then you're very clearly looking for the thread of that in the environment to follow.
Mm.
Whereas control feels like hands tightening, grasping things, pulling in close, and it almost or like reining things in, or somehow like trying to control everything around you, instead of like, here's the spark inside me. Where do I see that spark? Where's the easiest path towards that spark that's right in front of me right now? Like um yeah, I think is what I'm like hearing and feeling, that difference. um
Yeah. Yeah. I
so
love
I'm aware.
watching your hands go too. Like it's cool to be, oh, right.
Yeah, that's storytelling.
Yeah.
And our dance backgrounds.
Totally. Totally.
So I feel like there's sort of two threads here, and I'm aware of our time, and
Yeah.
sort of, so I'm framing these threads up in like a landing the plane kind of way. But one, I just briefly, because I think this sort of the thread we're most immediately following right now, I think is a beautiful segue towards sort of that. I think that piece, your particular approach to the postpartum time and your postpartum coaching and education, which is really more about sort of the skills and value, like the soft skills and values oriented. So I want to bring us there. But first, I just want to briefly because when I first kind of asked the question that started us down the thread that brought us here, I mentioned your interest, sort of how you talk about thriving families, thriving
Mm,
individuals, thriving communities.
mm,
And so I feel like we kind of opened that thread, and I'm aware during our conversation that, a lot of, I think similarly to freedom, we say thriving families, we say thriving
mm.
individuals, we say thriving communities, and yet each person is going to have a slightly different definition of like what that means to them. And so I would like to actually just, I don't know, offer you the opportunity or invite you to kind of frame up, if you can, like, what does, when you say thriving, like what is thriving within the context then of this conversation we've just had, what does thriving actually mean? Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
define that?
Um, I define that, I have a felt sense of when a person I have a felt sense of when I am like actually available and alive, and um
Hmm.
and when we're available for to meet the people that we're with, as so for sure if we're caretaking, we're able to meet them. When we're not thriving, we're able to meet their basic needs and more. We are able, when we're not thriving, to do that, thankfully. And when we're thriving, we're available for joy, for pleasure. And that is that is the like what's fundamental to having to being. So when I'm in touch with when I feel nourished, and when I feel nourished, and I can be in my I can be in touch with myself and what is true about me and what's authentic about me, and I can express myself most authentically. And then when I'm in that state and I'm available and I'm with my kids, then they can be there's space for them to be their authentic selves. They
Mm.
don't need to meet my expectations or fill my needs, or be narrow in their um
Expression.
expression. And so
Mm.
I also think it really goes back to that sense of like being held, and being and having how do we describe it? We described it like a spark
Mhm.
that's both like protected, but then it has the oxygen it
Mhm.
needs to stay alive. And I
Mhm.
think that like when we're thriving, we have that, where we feel
Mhm.
safe, we feel nourished, and then we can provide safety
Provide
and
that to
nourishment to
others. Yeah.
others. And so I
Yeah.
think it's just like, and it's not even just families, it's like I can provide that to,
Yep.
you know, I can provide that to my parents, I can provide that to my partner, it's like to my friends, to my clients. Like I think we can be, when we're thriving, we're available for life,
Yeah.
and for um and to give to others.
Yeah.
It's like the very first story that we talked about your experience of like mothering your trailer. That's what it was, right?
RV.
Like,
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
your RV.
Mhm.
That's the word. Is that sense of like, what did you need to put into yourself? Like, what did you need to let go of to be able to nourish yourself, to be able to be available for what you cared to be available for?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what thriving is to me. And I think it's like easier than we think it is
Yeah.
in some ways. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not
There's a
easier, it's simpler.
simpler. Yes. I think that's, yeah, because it's funny. I've been stepping into a new layer of that within myself. I feel like that's like an emergent process, right? An emergent journey of like, I think I refer to it in my business more as like wholeness, finding that wholeness. The more whole I am, and by whole, I mean like a bowl rather than a colander, so like rather than leaking, I have that sense of containment, and
Yeah.
I have more increased awareness internally of all the different pieces, the wants, the desires, the impulses, the stories, the wounds, the everything. And it's within, and I have the capacity to hold that,
Mm,
so that then I'm not seeking to plug the holes of the colander with
Mm,
other people, right? Or
yeah.
pieces of other people or things I see in other people, right? And so if I can sort of build that sense of wholeness myself, then you're right, I'm more available actually for interdependence and
Yes.
interconnection rather than codependence or like some kind of unhealthy merging,
Yes.
because it's not about, toxic individualism. It's like, it's about being more available for connection, but we're actually less available for connection the less whole we are in ourselves. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so I mean, I love that. And so yeah, that how you're defining thriving, yeah, it's not about having a specific birth experience or having the right birth story or having, the
Yeah.
right amount of, whatever. It's about like, can I own every aspect of my choice in this matter and the
Yeah.
things I didn't choose that I had to then digest, even if it
Yeah.
felt indigestible to me at the beginning, because it's what happened.
Yeah.
And the more, you can then own that and piece that back together, integrate that back into yourself, then the more available, then yeah, the more we're whole within ourselves, the less we, yeah, like you said, we need other people to fit into our expectations of who they are, or, and there can be a cost to that. There are relationships we lose or certain
Mm,
dynamics in relationships that we have to give up
mhm,
when we become whole that we may have gotten used to. So,
mhm,
I mean, I've been reaching another layer of that in my process recently.
mm.
And yeah, there's been a price, and
Yeah.
I was surprised. I was not expecting the price I had to pay for that
Mm,
deeper yes to another layer of myself.
mm.
um I was not expecting this one particular relationship and this one particular dynamic within that relationship to be the price that I had to pay, and there was immense grief around that I was
Oh,
not expecting.
yeah.
But I also am like very clear I wouldn't have it any other way,
Yeah.
and so if that's the price, I'm choosing to pay it. And not everybody is ready and willing to make that choice, and that's also okay, because again, it's not about one thing being right or wrong. It's about um yeah, can we really own our choices and our timing and our, who we are in this moment in
Yeah.
all of its broadness and narrowness and everything in between.
Yeah.
um yeah, and from there then we lead by example, and we naturally create containers then, whether it's for our colleagues or our parents or our siblings or our friends or our
Mhm,
partners or spouses or children or whatever.
mhm,
We
mhm,
Yeah, we lead by example, and then they have permission
mhm.
to be to be whole and to be
Yeah.
thriving and to be
Yeah.
yeah,
Totally. We give permission to be
expressive.
whole and thriving and expressive. And yeah. Yep. Exactly. Exactly
Yeah.
what you just
Mm.
said.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. So beautiful.
So yeah, so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of share where people can find you, and sort of, yeah, so I think that kind of, I feel like we sort of wrapped a little bit, but yeah, kind of that there may be a thread here if you want to kind of weave in like how you kind of take that soft skills approach, this new offering
Mm,
that you're
mm.
you're exploring.
Um, yeah. So I can be found um on Instagram at it's my first and last name. So it's Anna Carapetyan. Um, Kate will spell that.
Yes, I'll have
and
it in the show notes. Uh-huh.
and and then my website is heartandmindbirth.com.
Mm.
So those are how you can find me. And let's see what to weave in. Um, there is the tools. So there's just room for um, messiness, and there's room for mistakes and for so maybe I'll say this, that there's that we are in our like information age. There's a lot of direction toward like toward instruction and kind of doing
Like
things the right or wrong
prescriptive.
way.
Mhm.
Yep, a little bit prescriptive, and that can be like very helpful at times. And then I think doesn't what is always helpful. So I think that there are lots of sources of this. And what's always helpful is having like a sense of trust in yourself and trust in some skills that are like reframing, rethinking, being willing to surrender, um, having that sense, like we were talking about, like holding a vision, creating a vision, allowing yourself to even want something and explore that. And yeah, so I just have like a set of reframes and like simple skills and simple tools that don't have anything to do with like changing a diaper or swaddling or, you know, soothing techniques, except maybe they have to do with like soothing ourselves techniques
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
that are tools for having a different kind of experience, a different sense of empowerment.
Mhm.
It's a hopefully it's a deeper um, a deeper trust kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
empowerment through through a transition, through a rite of passage that is not often held as a rite of passage.
Yeah. Mm.
Um, and so this first round is starting before this airs, and it's experimental. And then my hope is to be doing it again. So, but I write, all the stuff that I am including, I write about and I put on my website or on my Instagram. It's just all like flowing right now and coming together and breaking apart and coming. Um,
Yeah.
it's becoming, and then it's unbecoming, and then it's
Sure.
becoming something new. And so that's where I am.
Yeah, lovely. And you do just do like one-on-one
Yeah,
work
yeah,
too. Yeah.
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 So I'm
Yeah.
based in Brooklyn, and I do one-on-one in person there or virtual too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you for
Yeah.
asking.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love that because I think again that kind of goes back to sort of that difference between control and focus, right?
Mhm,
And like if you
mhm,
have these sort of soft skills and you're more tuned into like your values and have that inner trust of like being able to tap into like what's my want, what's my need, then you can navigate what life throws at you because you
mhm.
sort of can keep keep the eye on the prize kind of thing while like letting go of some of the like tight holding around the specifics rather than like maybe overly focusing on like yes, I need to figure out how to like swaddle or how to suit, and yes, you do have to figure out
Yeah,
those things. Like you
yeah,
said, those things aren't unimportant, but the over
yeah,
focus on that sort of keeps you trying to control some of like the things that are, again, like you said, yeah, not less important, but
yeah,
just maybe not core like
yeah,
things or like central. They're not part of the central pillar that's going to
yeah,
really keep you supported. They're kind of
exactly.
like if it's a maypole, they're not building the maypole. They're kind of the threads attached to the maypole that,
Yeah,
are kind of, yeah, swirling around it.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Maypole's not quite the right metaphor, but it's what popped to mind right now. And so we're going with
Going with it.
it. Yeah. Well,
But
thank you so much for this conversation.
thank you, Kate.
Um,
It's really nice to talk to you as always.
yeah. Yeah. Same. Feel the same about you.
Thank you.
Lovely. So yeah, I'll have your contact information in the show notes. And so if anybody listening wants to reach out or connect with Anna, we'll have that information there. And then in the meantime, of course, if you've, appreciated this conversation, feel free to share wide and to rate where you listen to podcasts. Many places where you listen have spaces where you can rate the podcast, and that's really helpful. And just keeping it going and like I think they call it subscribing or following or whatever, then you get notified if new episodes come out, and that's also helpful for the podcast and just kind of new people being able to discover it more easily. So um yeah, and feel free to connect with me, Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or via email, kate@wildsacredjourney.com. And if you have a question too that you want to pose to Anna, you can always send it to me and I'll get it to her or whatever. So yeah, so we'll take a moment here just to take a couple deep breaths in and out again together, and just, yeah, there's something about this conversation that just sort of felt like waves, kind of like washing in and out. And so just letting the waves just kind of wash over you to whatever level you're prepared to receive it today. Honoring the fire that we gathered around, honoring the hearts that beat within each of us. And with deep gratitude, we say thank you, and until next time.